Namaskar. We are back again to our favorite topic, that is J Sai Deepak. Now, after reacting to a lot of recent political stuff, now I have gone back to an older video, but the content of the video remains still relevant. The title of the video is J Sai Deepak on history, identity, and India. Well, this is a evergreen topic in India anyway, so I'll be reacting to it. I'll give link to the original video in the description. Go and check it out. Come back and react with me. Give me a thumbs up. Subscribe to the channel. Let's start.
I'm someone who sees a lot of value in reading the subject, in understanding history and its relevance on a day-to-day basis. So it makes sense for someone like me who loves the subject to read about it, to understand its value. But why should everybody read history? What is the point? How does history help you on a day-to-day basis? Does it help you get a job?
Unless you want to become a history professor.
I don't think so. I'm not sure. If someone wants to simply look at a subject from a utilitarian standpoint, which is, isse kitna paisa ban sakta hai? Let's ask that straight, blunt question. History is perhaps the last as far as the list of priorities go. Is it possible for you to crudely equate history with identity? Is it possible to say that history is where you come from, who you are, and how did you arrive at where you are today? Right? It's possible.
Well, it is possible, yeah.
Now, why is history relevant today? For academics and people who love history as a subject, you don't need to give them a specific incentive or a reason to love the subject. They are drawn to the subject. लेकिन जिनको history पसंद नहीं है या उसमें रुचि नहीं है, how are you going to attract them? I'll make it very relevant to you. Right from reservations, right from the two-nation theory, right from the Aryan invasion theory, कि भारत के लोग कहाँ के हैं, all these have now become relevant in the discourse of this country, in its day-to-day national discourse. Tell me one aspect of Indian politics which is free of identity politics today. Language is an issue, sect is an issue, religion is an issue, caste is an issue, water is an issue, everything is an issue. And it
Well, people do tend to find issues which are divising in a certain manner. तभी उनकी जो politics है, उनका activism है, it get fueled by that division. So of course, people will keep on finding ways to divide people and then capitalize on that division.
It all boils down to identity. If it all boils down to identity, how is it possible that history doesn't find enough traction? History plays a huge role. When people in the 1917 to 1970s were hounded out of Tamil Nadu, history was used to hound them out on the basis of the Aryan invasion theory, saying some castes are people who have come from the north and these are the remnants of the Aryans. They are not Dravidians, they are not true Dravidians, kick them out. When Gujarat was formed, it was previously part of the Bombay Presidency. When Gujarat was carved out of Bombay Presidency, it was based on a certain identity. When Telangana was split for Andhra Pradesh, it is based on a certain identity. It's not economics, it's not always economics. Economics does play a certain role. But beyond that, it is a question of identity. Therefore, as far as I'm concerned, anybody who doesn't know history doesn't know who he is and where he comes from. He's a person who's rootless, he's a person who's deracinated. But some might say, I don't care. History really doesn't affect me. I am someone who's interested in earning my livelihood, having a good life, a good wife, and get out of the place. That's it. I'm not interested in anything else. Sure, fantastic. You can abandon your identity. You have the choice of abandoning your identity. But when you exercise that free will, you realize that it is a decision that only you have taken. But somebody who continues to associate that identity with you will never let go of that. As long as that identity continues to stick to your soul, to your body, he will continue to have a problem with that identity, even if you let go of that identity. You can say, I have a problem with a certain community, or a certain community has a problem with me. I might as well leave this place and go to someplace else. I'll go and settle perhaps in Vancouver or in the United States of America, in the golden pastures of California. Wherever you want to go, you go. But the fact that you are a certain person and you come from a certain background will continue to haunt you unless and until you convert or you change. Therefore,
even if you convert, You cannot give up your like biological inheritance. You cannot convert your race. So that will still continue. That will still continue to stay with you. So you can't get rid of it any way possible.
Therefore, anybody who devalues identity, according to me, has simply not understood the value of history. The Communist Party of China, for all practical purposes, subscribes to the Marxist ideology, and then the next version, which is the Maoist ideology. And therefore, according to them, they believe in the class war. According to them, there is the oppressed and there are the oppressors. This is the only two camps in which the world is divided. And therefore, for the next 30-40 years, they went about destroying every symbol of Chinese culture under all sorts of names. The Great Leap, the Long Revolution, this and that, they kept on doing it. But today, they've decided that the vision of China, the vision of the Middle Kingdom, is central in order for them to build a grand narrative if they have to plan the next 100 years. So, an avowedly communist regime, which is not supposed to have any belief in culture, and which rejects the idea of history altogether, has realized the value of history. So no matter what you do, history is a subject that you can't run away from. So that's point number one. Point number two, Sir mentioned that we must forget all our...
Who do not know what exactly is the communist idea, in the context of history, it is that all of this history that glorifies your past, that gives you a certain cultural identity, it's all a myth, and the only reality is the differences between the classes, those being bourgeoisies and the proletariat. Now bourgeoisie continues to oppress the people who are like proletariat, the working class basically, and the bourgeoisies are the feudal or the aristocrats. So there is nothing else. The communists want nothing else but to eradicate this class war by making everyone completely equal. And the history will reach to a certain point where it will cease to exist, and that world will be a communist utopia. Now, according to J Sai Deepak, they initially subscribed to that idea, but later on they realized कि अगर हम अपनी हिस्ट्री को, अपने हेरिटेज को, अपने कल्चर को गिव अप कर देंगे, then we cannot kind of sell out this grand narrative of the Chinese Empire, of the Middle Kingdom, and we need that authenticity to sell out that idea. Or where does that authenticity come from? It comes from history. कि हम पहले इतने glorious हुआ करते थे, तो of course we have that credibility because we had that history. तो हम आगे भी glorious हो सकते हैं. So that is what this revivalism of the Chinese idea has heralded.
Differences and divisions, and we must think as Indians. I will make a bold and perhaps a politically incorrect statement. सत्य के बिना शांति तो सुलभ नहीं है, ना ही मुमकिन है. Unless and until the truth is ironed out, it is thrashed out, it is discussed, it is debated and presented with honesty, there is no question of lasting peace. You will continue to brush truth and facts and history under the carpet, but the more you try and do it, कूड़ा तो वहां पे जमा होता रहेगा, and किसी दिन सबको नजर आ ही जाएगा. The more you try to suppress spring, the more it is bound to rebound. Therefore, it is important to face reality, to accept a few facts, because only then you will come to a common ground. You will come to the same page.
Yeah, it is the same thing. It is the same thing that Dr. Shashi Tharoor pointed out in his speech in the Oxford Union debate, where he says कि economic reparations की तो हमें ज़रूरत नहीं है. And Sai Deepak mentioned about this division on economic grounds. Dr. Shashi Tharoor said that economic reparations की हमें ज़रूरत नहीं है because we are already capable of that. And anyway, the reparation that England gives, the aid that England gives, is equal to the fertilizer subsidy that Indian government gives to farmers. So we don't need economic reparations, but we need moral reparations. We need that acknowledgement of the wrongdoing that you committed. So at least even if that comes, then we'll be satisfied morally, at least. But when it comes to talking about that in India, then nobody talks about it, because the supposed people who owe the reparations are a political voter bank for the party of Shashi Tharoor himself. So of course they will not talk about it, and that's when this whole debate comes.
And only when you come to the same page, it is possible for you to have a discussion on yahan se aage kahan jana hai, kaise badhna hai. But until you arrive at the consensus, there is no question of you thinking of a common shared vision. There are multiple ideas of India as far as this country is concerned, for the simple reason that history has become the most contested battleground through political ideologies, which is why it is important for us to recontextualize Indian history. Have you ever heard of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of the South African government, which was set up after Nelson Mandela came to power? ये Truth and Reconciliation Commission होता क्या है? Before Dr. Mandela came to power, it was a white minority which was ruling the country, just like it was in
It was like apartheid state where blacks did not have equal rights as to whites. They were not allowed to sit in buses or maybe enter in clubs or pubs, things like that. They had separate schools, separate barber shops, separate cinema halls, everything.
Zimbabwe, before Robert Mugabe came to power. Subsequently, they lost power and they gave way to the ANC, the African National Congress. Now, the African National Congress decided that you can't kick these people out. They have lived here for generations and we have to coexist. But there is such deep hatred and mistrust between the white community and the African community that it is impossible for them to sit in a room and have a civilized dialogue.
Partition kar lete. That seems to be the solution that the Indian leadership reached to. Partition kyun nahi kara? Blacks could have lived in their geographical area and whites could have lived in their geographical area.
So they decided, उनको मुझे गाली देना है और मुझे इनको गाली देना है, क्यों ना एक रूम में बैठ के ये कर लें और आगे बढ़े. Decide करें कि आगे करना क्या है. So which is why they decided to constitute the Truth and Reconciliation Committee. Why? It is important for history to be documented where all the barbarism and all the cruelty that the African community was subjected to by the white minority was acknowledged. It was accepted, and at least by way of a token reparation, harjana bharna pada. That people who have benefited out of this slavery and people who have benefited out of this oppression must pay a certain price for what they have done to others as a token apology. That's the very argument that Mr. Shashi Tharoor is making to the United Kingdom when it comes to reparations to India.
But that acknowledgement will only come if they accept कि हमने कुछ गलत किया है. Now I talked to some of the people, some of the Bengali people, and they seem to be living under this delusion. So when I say that the famine happened in Bengal, like Bengalis suffered the most during that famine, some of the answers that I get are very shocking. They say that, but मेरे जो दादाजी थे, they benefited a lot under the rule of the British. So I want to go back to that era. I want them to come back and then again colonize us. But they forget what he just mentioned. कि तुम उनकी atrocities में उनका साथ दे रहे हो. And after they have gone, you're not guilty about it. You're not saying that we shouldn't have done that. We should have stood by our own people. But let's even forget कि तुम्हें guilt नहीं है. But at least don't pine for that era again. At least say कि हाँ, maybe in hindsight we made some mistake. At that time we did not know. But this is the kind of mentality that we have to tolerate and live with. So from our own people, so what can you expect from British?
He says it's not a question of quantum, it's not a question of quantity, it is a question of principle. Let's put it in Indian context. Assume that there is a certain community which came part of the invasion horde which came to India 1,000 years ago, let's say in 700 AD when Sindh was invaded.
He's being politically correct. We have no such obligation. So I think he means the Islamic invaders.
For the very first time. Can you hold the son or the grandson or the prapautra responsible for what the grandfather did? It's impossible. You can't hold him responsible. He was not there. He did not play a role. His free will did not play a role. Therefore, you can't hold people who live in the present responsible for the actions of their ancestors. ये बात जो है बहुत जगहों पे लागू होती है, चाहे अब हिंदू कास्ट की बात करें या फिर बाकी कम्युनिटीज की बात करें. It applies both ways.
But what if they continue to hold that idea? They are very happy about what happened in the past, and they are pining again for that era, like the example I just mentioned. So I have heard this opinion in Muslims a lot of times, where they say कि वो हमारे लिए एक golden era था when Aurangzeb used to rule. Then the whole of India was under the Muslims. It was under the subjugation of Muslims, and everyone had to play by our rules. So that was our golden era, and inshallah it will come back. So what if people hold that idea, even though it will never happen, I know that. But if people still continue to hold that idea, they continue to associate themselves with that version of history and believe that it is their identity, then are they responsible? Should we continue to hold them responsible, or should we just say ki, no, they are not responsible and ignore them? What do you think? What do you guys think? Please tell me in the comments.
Therefore, if you can't kick these people out, and it is important for us to talk about living together, the only way for us is to agree that you did this to me, this was wrong. Problem as far as India is concerned is truth and reconciliation have never been part of our historical discourse. They have never been part of our history textbooks. They have never been part of our historical curricula, because we have tried to brush under the carpet everything that has happened since 700 AD. We have tried to brush under the carpet the reality because we are scared of it. There could be a good reason. People might say, अगर आप पास्ट की इतनी बात करना शुरू करेंगे और आप खोदने लगेंगे कि इतने लोग मारे गए, इतने लोगों का बलात्कार हुआ, इतने लोग बंदी बनाए गए, so many people were made slaves and they were dragged across the Hindu Kush. You say all of these things, it might incite violence. Therefore, perhaps the best thing to do is to brush it on the carpet and behave as if it doesn't exist. In the last 70 years, ever since we decided that perhaps the best way to deal with the situation is create a separate country and establish a separate country, has this proven to be a success? I don't think so. Every few years there's a problem. Every few years allegations are hurled against each other. Every few years we go back to what happened 1200 years ago. So to behave as if history is not relevant and has not mattered is stupidity. That is the behavior of an ostrich. Therefore, it is important to recontextualize.
The editor did a very contrasting job. पीछे एक ominous सा music चल रहा है, ominous बातें हो रही हैं, but they still managed to pack some humor inside it. So I don't know how to feel about it, but it's amusing at the very least.
Contextualize history. It is important to recontextualize history and take it from the hands of those people who are intent in propagating a defeatist mindset. I'll give this a different twist altogether. If you read history textbooks on a regular basis, all you hear and all you read is, for the last 2000 years or at least 1200 years, India's history has been nothing short of a monstrous defeat after defeat in the face of invasions. That is the only thing that you read. And when a child reads this over and over again, let's say from the 5th standard to the 12th standard or the 10th standard, that means in his formative years, he is being told that he is part of a defeated nation, of a defeated community. And when that happens, it is bound to affect a sense of self-esteem. It reflects in your body language, it reflects in your approach to everything. Nobody wants to be told in this country, despite all these barbaric invasions, despite all the monumental and wholesale destruction and genocide that was meted out to the people native to this country, we are still here. Greek history abhi sirf kitabon mein hai, the original Greek history. Roman history is only in books. You've heard of this place called Constantinople in history. What is it known as today? Istanbul. What is known as the Royal Mosque in Turkey was previously the Hagia Sophia Church. You don't have a trace of African traditions and pagan roots. So I had the opportunity to go to Latvia, Lithuania and Estonia. Of all the places that I chose for a vacation, I chose these 3 countries, the Baltic countries. For the simple reason that if you go to that place, आपको हिंदी कानों में सुनाई पड़ेगा. Sanskrit आपको सुनाई पड़ेगा. Because one of the closest languages to Sanskrit is Lithuanian. What is the connection? Does it prove that we are all actually the santan of invaders, the Aryans? Or does it prove that log yahan se bahar gaye the? So, We are fighting on complex.
See, this is the level of inferiority, superiority complex that we are fighting. Okay, as soon as we find something worth our reverence inside India, we instinctively believe that it came out of the India. And as soon as we find something which has some connection with Indian culture, and then we still associate कि वहीं से लोग इंडिया में आए होंगे. ऐसा कैसे हो सकता है कि India actually taught something to other people? So that is the level of inferiority complex that we are living under and which has been imposed on us. कि आपको जो कुछ भी आता है वो सब बाहर से ही आया है, आपने खुद कुछ नहीं करा है. And that is the basis of iron invasion theory. This is the end of part 1 of this video. We'll continue this discussion further in part 2.